Hi, and welcome to episode 99 of the Heartland Knits podcast. My name is Vicki, but you can find me as Heartland Knits on Ravelry and Instagram. And today is Sunday, March 22nd, 2015. I'm getting started recording this later than I expected to. I kind of posted a picture or two to Instagram and then conversations commenced and it just got to be way later in the day than I was expecting. And I didn't want to leave it till tomorrow because that's kind of what happened last week. And then one didn't happen. So let me show you what's been on my needles for the last 2 weeks. And when last we spoke, I was knitting a lot of white stockinette stitch. I need a lot more white stockinette stitch. So this is my egg bohus. So now I've got the front done and I've got the back done. So the entire body is done. I haven't even started on the sleeves. This is a top-down yoke sweater. So I have both sleeves yet to do. I did some little detours and then it's kind of back to how it was the last time you saw it. I have this kind of lacy edging on the bottom with a 2-stitch I-cord, and then as I was knitting the back I thought, well, maybe I'll do something different, and then I ended up taking that off the front, and then I didn't like what I did, so I had put it all back, but it's all put back together. I have my steek. This is going to be a cardigan, and so these are the pink line is my kind of scrap yarn that marks the middle of the front, and then I have a crochet steek. You can't really see the stitches on the white, but maybe you'll be able to see them on there, so that you can see that line there. Those are the crochet stitches, and you put the crochet in there to sort of stabilize the yarn so that when you cut it, it doesn't unravel. This is merino angora yarn, and actually I did the crochet steek. This is the second time I did it because when I changed the edging, it had a different amount of rows, so I couldn't just take that out. And then when I put this one back on, it needed to go all the way down to the bottom of this. So I had to take the crochet out, the first crochet, and it was hard to get out. So this merino angora, I'm pretty sure is not going anywhere. But what you do, just in case you've never done a crochet steek before, you have that center line, and then on either side of it you crochet into, or you put your crochet hook into the right leg of one stitch and then the left leg of its adjacent stitch, and work it that way. And so you're doing it kind of this way all the way up. You can't really, when it's white on white like this, you have to be really careful to not kind of veer off and kind of get like a diagonal stitch, because you want each of those like caught into the crochet. And the row gauge on this is 12.5 stitches to the inch, so it's pretty smart, but it's white, so it's not as bad as if it was a really dark color. And then I don't know if it will show. I do my color work, I've done them different ways, but this one is done with a 10-stitch steek, because that's how like Joyce Williams did hers, and it just kind of makes sense to me, and I like how it looks. I've done them with the uneven number, like with 7 stitches, and then you cut in the middle of between 2 stitches, or middle of a stitch, where this you will cut between 2 stitches. So I do a 10-stitch steek. So stitches 1 and 10 are the background color, and stitches 2 and 9 are the pattern color. And so then the next 2 stitches on both sides are, you alternate, so they're like in the speckled. The rest of the stitches I do up in stripes, but then these 2 stitches I speckle, so they alternate. So, and then one of these is the background color and one of these is the pattern color. So that's my 10, and then I will cut right in between those two, so like a line. So if it's like, say your sweater is black and white, it would go, these 2 would be black, and then these 2 would be white, and then these 2 would alternate black and white, and then white and black, all the way up, so they would speckle. And then this one would be black and one would be white, and I would cut in between those 2. I like how it looks when it's done. And when you have the speckles, it's nice to do when you're doing the crochet steek, because then you can tell that you're not off, because you've got, let's say you're in the right leg of a black stitch and the left leg of a white stitch, and then the next time it's opposite, so you're in the left leg of the right leg of a white stitch and the left leg of a black stitch. So you always have one of each of the colors, and you're alternating. So that's as far as I got. And I did get the neck stitches on a needle. When I started this, it's a top down, I do kind of a provisional cast on, where I just cast on stitches and then start knitting, because I like to start the stranded fabric with a little bit of knitting underneath my needles. It just helps my gauge. Otherwise, if I just start with a kind of a plain provisional cast on, those first couple of rounds are just a little looser, because I'm trying to compensate, kind of overcompensating. I don't want them to be too tight. So I start with a little fabric. So I cast this on last spring, summer, probably in June sometime. This was when I kind of went into my knitting slump, and I wasn't knitting a whole lot, and I really was not. This just shows I really was not like totally like thinking clearly at that point. Let's say, because so I had that the provisional cast on done with just scrap yarn, and somehow so usually you have that amount of stitches that you cast on, and then you increase on that, like the first or second round, I can't remember. Anyway, I ended up increasing into the provisional, using the provisional cast on as my what I increased onto. So it was not easy to get these stitches back on a needle. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I know I cast this on thinking, I wasn't feeling like I wanted to knit, and I thought, oh, I'll cast on a bows, that will make me want to knit it, and it really didn't. This is what I took to ZK last year, and I knit like half a round in 4 days. So anyway, it took a long time and was very sort of precarious. It's a good thing it's this, I had to like cut yarns and carefully thread them and get them on the needle. It was not good, but it's all on needles and it's ready to go, and I know what I'm going to do for the bands and stuff. So I had wanted to get this done for Easter, which is 2 weeks away. It doesn't have to be done for, it's not like I need to give it away, or I have to, I'm planning on wearing it or anything. It's just that that's the date kind of set in my mind so that it doesn't get pushed back, because I know once kind of May happens and the garden kind of takes over for a while, and then it's like summer, and I don't want to be like knitting it and finishing it up in the summer. I want it to be done before then. So that's the only thing that really has been on my needles for the last 2 weeks. I do have something off my needles though, And I showed these, I was working on these. I finished my little fingerless mitts that I was working on the last show. And these are the Lucy mitts by Dawn Catanzano. I think that's her name. They are made out of quince chickadee, and this is the Belize color. And I knit a pair of these early before Christmas last year, and I wanted to make a pair for myself. And I've worn them a couple times, and I like them a lot. I like how they come down pretty far on my fingers. The only thing I'm not really, I did these exactly like I did the first pair, and I don't like, the thumb is really exposed. So I wore these to walk a couple times, and I ended up having to pull my thumb in the inside, which kind of defeats the purpose. So I have this teeny little ball of yarn left that I'm thinking I'm going to take the cast on or cast off and extend it out as far as I can. I'll divide that little ball in two and go out as far as I can to make them longer, just because I think I would like them a little bit longer than they are. I did these pretty much just according to pattern, except changing where the beginning of the round is, because I think I said this before. My personal rule for mittens and gloves is that the beginning of round has to start on the side of your hand, the karate chop side. And so I changed that, and then I changed the cast on and cast off. I did this sort of a kind of more decorative cast off with a double strand of yarn. So those are done. Yay! So then, since I don't have all that much knitting to show you, and I had been talking about steeks a little bit, and it's also that kind of time of year where I'm washing sweaters and, getting ready to store them. I feel really lucky. I have a cedar closet to store my hand knits in, to keep them nice and safe. That is the one place I am sticking with that policy. I know I read the Marie Kondo book, The Magic Art of Tidying Up, and she that's like part of her premise is that you shouldn't have to kind of change out kind of winter and summer wardrobe. But for hand knits, I feel like they're safer in the cedar closet. So anyway, I thought I would take some of them out. Some of them were out already, but I can show you kind of some other ways that I have done steeking on different sweaters. So this is my very first steeked cardigan. I knit this in the winter of 1990, and I had a copy of Alice Starmore's Fair Isle book, which is back in print. I think that is the definitive source for like true Fair Isle knitting. And Fair Isle, Fair Isle is an actual place. It's an actual island called Fair Isle. It's in the Shetland Islands, and it doesn't matter if people are kind of misusing that term. I don't know. I just think it's a little disrespectful. I mean, because this is their knitting tradition, and it shouldn't just be plastered onto any stranded knitting, because there's the Swedish and the Norwegians, and they all have sort of a knitting tradition for stranded knitting, and to just plaster Fair Isle over everything, because Fair Isle is a specific way of using colors, and they have kind of specific patterns that they often did. So anyway, this one was my, if you are interested, I recommend that book, the Fair Isle Knitting book by Alice Starmore. But anyway, because in there, she has a couple different ways of handling steeks. So my first sweater, this is knit out of Shetland yarn. I think this was Jamieson Smith Shetland. So Shetland has those kind of unique properties where it has kind of little hairs and they were like stick together like nicely, so that I did this sweater and did not use anything to stabilize the steek. You just cut. Um, and It's a little nerve-wracking. The first time you cut into your knitting, it is a little nerve-wracking. Elizabeth Zimmerman said, when after you make the first cut, go lie in your bedroom with a damp washcloth over your forehead. Some people use whiskey. I think I used chocolate, but so this one I will show you the inside. I don't know that it's going to show. It looks a little kind of like messy, and that is kind of one of the aspects of doing this kind of just cut, because you cut up the middle, and I don't remember how many stitches were in this steek, but you cut to within like a stitch or two of where you have the band on. And I pretty much always put my bands on, the button bands, before I cut the actual steek, because especially back then, I used to do button bands probably at least 3 times. You put so much time into your knitting. It's like the little finishing things and like getting so that the button band doesn't pull up or doesn't ripple or anything. And back then I'd been knitting for like maybe 5 years. So anyway, you cut the fabric very close to the edge, and then to hold it down, you kind of overcast sew like one way all the way up and then all the way kind of crossing it all the way down. So mine is pretty messy looking, but it's held up since all that time. And maybe if you did this more, it would get a little neater looking. And I'll be honest, this, after I cut it, and I cut it that close to the edge, I literally laid on the floor with it. I did not move it until that was sewn up and down on both sides, because yeah, it made me a little nervous. So that is one way, just cutting. This works fine for Shetland yarn. I've done a couple sweaters doing that, and it's fine. The Shetland, felts down, really easily, and plus they've got those little hairs to kind of like stick to each other. So yeah, it's fine. So when it came to do the sleeves, I did sort of I'm really surprised, I did sort of a shaped armhole. And I don't know, at the time I can remember, I couldn't really understand the concept of where you kind of set a new steek for the underarm stitches. And I think because I was doing that shaped armhole, I was like, where I was going to be doing this decreasing and then have the steek stitches, and kind of didn't really understand like how that was going to work. And maybe I don't remember if I tried it and it looks funny, because Meg Swanson calls it having the kangaroo pouch, because because she often does this like around the neckline, and it just all gets bunched up together. So I probably just didn't have faith that it was going to work. So in the Starmore book, she's got another kind of a steek called a wrap steek. And I thought, well, I'll do that for the sleeves. And so what you do for that kind of a steek is because you're doing this stranded, so you have 2 strands, 2 different colors of yarn, you just kind of wrap them around the needle, maybe 4 or 5 times, and then kind of go on knitting, so that when you come back to the armhole again, those stitches you drop off, and then you wrap around some more. So when you get the whole thing knit, you've got kind of like maybe this much of yarn kind of just stranded between, like where your armhole will go. So to open that up, you have to cut up the middle. So yeah, that means you've got 2 strands of yarn on one side of the armhole and 2 strands of yarn on the other side of the armhole, times 2 because you have 2 armholes. Lots of little ends. Yeah, you live, you learn. So I'm going to show you, I don't know if it's going to show up, but all those, there's like tiny little ends you can see. All those ends are woven in. Here's my and that's on the other side too. So all those little ends are woven in on both sides, both sleeves. You know, this was way back when, and I used to like talk on the phone to friends a lot. So this kind of just sat by the phone, and I would, you know, sit and talk to a friend for an hour, and I'd weave in stitches as I was talking. And, you know, it took a while, but they're all woven in. So yeah, I don't know that I would really suggest that method. But so that was kind of like 2 different ways of doing steeks. And then there is also you often see this for like Norwegian sweaters, where you use a sewing machine and to sew along the edges to kind of keep things in place. And so that's what this is. Let's see if I can, well, there's a string hanging, maybe you'll be able to see that. So I did this on there, so you can see that white, that's my sewing. That's just using sewing thread. You can, so the cut ends are right under that, and this is a sleeve. So you can use a sewing machine, and what you do is you kind of sew down the left half of a stitch, you know, and then kind of sew up the other direction of the right half of that stitch. And then when you cut it, you kind of cut right in between that bar, kind of in between. If you look at the fabric of the knitting, there's like a little bar between the middle of a stitch. That's what you cut. You carefully cut up that bar. So this is right on the edge there. You can do it with a sewing machine, or you can do it by hand. This sweater I actually sewed by hand for a couple reasons. This is my this is called the Lupin sweater. This is a Meg Swanson design. It was in her big hardcover book. I think that's the knitting one, but you can also get it. She's got a DVD called Cardigan Details, which kind of shows as they filmed as she was knitting her version, and she shows everything. So the thing about the sewn steek is, so, you know, this is my sleeve. So I did that up the front also, but kind of with a cardigan, you know, it can open up and stuff. You kind of want that to look kind of neat and tidy, where when you have just those, like the cut edge showing, it looks a little messy. So this is the front of my cardigan. There was like one place I can kind of show you. So this is, there's the cut edge is just in the inside there. I kind of sewed it down. You know, when you're doing like kind of applique quilting, and you just take the needle tip and just kind of turn the cut edge down and then sew it down. That's kind of what I did all the way along there, just because it makes it neater. This yarn is Bartlett Yarns Rangeley wool. So it's like a worsted to maybe Aronish weight, which is why I did it by hand. I didn't put it like under this. I was worried about putting it in the sewing machine because that was the other thing that I was talking about on Instagram. It's this sewing machine that I have access to is pretty old. It was just dated to 1947. I knew it was late 90s or late 40s. And I didn't want anything to happen to it with like this really thick. I have used it for like a thinner, thinner sweaters, but this was so thick. But the like sew and steek is really good for this like heavier kind of wool or sweater, because if you could do a crochet steek on this weight, just easily, but it would make it much bulkier because you've got that crochet, and then how it flips back, it would just make a bigger, thicker kind of edge there that I don't know that I would especially want. So, there's different reasons why you might choose one method over the other. Plus the sewing method this is kind of a Norwegian style sweater, and that's kind of the way, like if the Dale of Norway sweaters were done that way. This is also the only method that I have used that the steek has failed on. So it came undone. I did do a Dale of Norway sweater that I sewed the steek, and I felt really, I had done a couple of the Shetland Fair Isles, and was really, they were fine, and I was doing this Dale of Norway sweater, and that's how it said to do it, and I thought, oh, I'm going to do it that way, it'll be like super secure. And so I usually put the bands on first, and I did that with that one, and then I cut it open, and I thought, oh, I don't really, there was like something I didn't like, wasn't perfect, and I thought, oh, it's sewn, I can take that off and put a new one on, and that's when it failed. So they do fail. I didn't know. I just felt like horrible that I was probably the only person that ever happened to, until, I don't know, it was probably about 10 years later was when I went. It was after I'd gone to knitting camp. I don't know, I ran into Joyce Williams somewhere, and we were talking, and she said something about, steeks failing, and I went, other people's steeks fail? And she's like, oh, everybody's does. So I don't feel so bad telling you, because in case you're the person out there that you've had one fall apart and you're like, I did it, we'll never do that again. And, try it again. I actually reknit that, and that probably had something to do with the yarn I used, because it was a Dale of Norway yarn that I loved. It was called Tyr. It was a mohair wool blend. It was like a sport weight yarn. It was the nicest yarn. It was super soft, but it was shiny, and the mohair content just really kind of took the dye and looked really vibrant and pretty colors. But it's I would knit many sweaters if it wasn't discontinued, but the mohair also made it a little slippery, and I think that's kind of why the stitches kind of slid out of the knitted. But I ended up, I completely panicked when that happened, and I ended up ripping it out. The sleeve steeks hadn't been cut yet, and I ended up ripping the sweater apart and reknitting a different sweater out of that yarn. It had lots of splices, but I knit my Sertle. It was with another Dale of Norway pattern. I knit it as a cardigan, but I knit it back and forth, and so I learned how to knit back and forth in pattern, always looking at the right side. So that's 3 kinds. And so then the crochet steek is kind of my favorite method now. And this, I think, was kind of invented, or it was like, first I heard about it was kind of early 2000s-ish, in that kind of a time frame. And I really like how the finished edge looks. So I haven't cut the white one, but this is my blue one bohus, which I think this is my favorite of all my bohus sweaters. But I did the crochet steek on there, so it looks really similar to how the sewn one looks when it's the edge is turned under, but that edge turns under just automatically with the crochet. So where I had the white in the color work, so this one has the blue on the color work, and so you can see that's how that line looks there. And I do have this sewn down because I'm fussy like that, but it just like turns over, so that cut edge just automatically turns underneath the crochet, so it just makes it look like pretty and neat and tidy. And I don't have any sort of worries about them coming undone. If you've never done a crochet or any kind of steek before, what I would suggest to you, and I never thought, when I did my first sweater, I was knitting, I didn't know anybody else that knit. I just kind of had books and things, but do a little sample piece. Just do a little swatch, and whatever method that you want to do, use that to stabilize it, and then cut it and just see how it reacts, and if you have to change anything. I did do that. The first time I did a crochet steek was on my level 3 sweater about 10 years ago. I did the Master Knitter program, and for level 3, which is the most advanced one, you have to do at that time, I don't know what the requirements are nowadays, but at that time you had to do either an Aran or a Norwegian or Fair Isle sweater. And I did a Norwegian sweater that took me a couple months to knit. It was a pretty small gauge. I should get it out and show it to you sometime. But I wanted to do a crochet steek, and I had never done one before, and I wanted to make sure I was going to do it right. So I did a little sample before cutting that one up, and it just helps ease your mind, so you're not as worried. So anyway, that is kind of my little history of steek sweaters that I've done. I've done more than these, but these kind of had all the different elements of ones that I've, different methods. But I hope you all have a good week, and come back next week. This was episode 99, and next week is going to be episode 100, which totally boggles my mind because I never thought I would get to episode 100 ever. I started this podcast kind of a year after my last chemo. I had done a couple little practicey, can I do this things, but I kind of started in earnest a week, recording every week. That's episode, I guess it's on there as episode 2, because I called the first one episode 0. So, but that one, I never ever expected to have 100 episodes, because I never expected. It was a year after my last chemo. I didn't think I was still going to be here. 100, and technically this episode 100 should have been last fall if I hadn't kind of taken all summer off. Oh, and before I forget, big thank yous to Sarah and Kristen of the In a Snit podcast, who mentioned my podcast on theirs. I met Sarah at ZK last summer, and I met Christy at the January Thaw. So it was really good, fun to meet both of them. I don't know if Sarah's coming back to ZK but it was fun. I was like totally stunned that when they mentioned my podcast on their last episode. But thank you so much. And yeah, if I hadn't taken all last summer off, I would have had episode 100 last fall sometime. But anyway, I have a bunch of stuff that I want to do. I'm gonna like show next week for like prizes, and to have like start a prize entry. It'll take a couple weeks, but so come back for that. And until I see you then, from my heart to yours, happy knitting.